Welcome back. We have two more contributions to the debate today before we start the summing up and some virtual networking. Now, the impact that buildings have on the environment has been recognised for many years, and FM's role in all aspects of sustainability has become a core competency for us all. However, the pace of climate change, the public's changing attitude towards it, and the challenging targets set by governments around the world would probably have made carbon reduction our #1 priority in 2020 if it hadn't been for COVID. But it will certainly be a big theme for our future. So what do we do now? When will your business become a net zero organisation? How long before every client demands it, not just for themselves, but for their whole supply chain? Here to talk about the impact, challenges and opportunities of becoming a net zero organisation is a chartered energy engineer with considerable experience in carbon management across a variety of sectors. He is the Net Zero Development Director for ENGIE. Please welcome Matt Dracup.
Hello, I'm Matt Dracup. I'm the Net Zero Development Director at ENGIE. I'm here today to talk to you about the impacts, challenges and opportunities of becoming net zero carbon. So I work for ENGIE, and our business strategy is to be the world leader in the zero carbon transition as a service. And we've set ourselves up as a company to be able to do that. I work in the energy and carbon solutions team at ENGIE. We're a team of energy specialists, including chartered energy managers and chartered engineers. And we provide services to clients all around net zero, from basic data management all the way through to identification and implementation of low carbon solutions. Today, I want to talk to you about, first of all, what net zero carbon means. It's a hot topic, and it's a subject that people talk a lot about, but I think it's important to set the scene about what we actually mean by net zero. Then we'll talk about the business case for becoming a net zero organisation, what challenges you might face in that journey, and ultimately what the benefits of going down that road are. So starting off, what does net zero carbon mean? It very much depends on your ambition and how you set your pledge or ambition for the future around net zero. There are different terms that are used fairly interchangeably. So there's zero carbon, net zero, carbon neutral, and 100% renewable. Lots of different certification out there. So let's look at the definition of those terms. Zero carbon means that no carbon emissions are produced. And this is important because it's very difficult to actually become completely zero carbon. The only sort of one that we are aware of that is zero carbon is if you're talking about zero carbon aspects like electricity, which is from 100% renewable sources. Carbon neutrality and net zero are pretty much the same thing. And this is really the more sort of common ambition for most organisations, and indeed is the target that the UK has set itself. So this means that there are still some emissions generated by the organisation, whether it's buildings, processes, but these emissions are being offset elsewhere, making the overall emissions net zero. But then you also have to define what you are making net zero. And this is all about setting the boundary and putting that detail into your pledge and setting that out at the very beginning. And so this could be just one building, it could be a whole organisation, it could be a particular manufacturing process that you have, it could be a particular product that you want to have a net zero across its value chain. But you really need to set out that boundary at the very beginning. And then, of course, to complicate things, there are 3 different types of carbon emissions: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 are your direct emissions, where you are combusting fuel. So that could be gas on site or fuel in vehicles. Scope 2 is energy indirect, and this is normally, for most organisations, just imported electricity that you have. And then Scope 3 is everything else, all the embedded carbon in the things that you buy in. And Scope 3 can also be upstream and downstream, so it's across your whole value chain. And I mentioned there was plenty of certification and standards out there, and it's a bit of a minefield, and it's difficult to know which one to choose. So there's all the different things that underpin the processes you go through in terms of reporting, things like ISO 2001, science-based targets, etc. Then there's all these different standards for verification of carbon emissions. But fundamentally, if you want to become net zero, we recommend that you use PAS 2060, which is the specification for carbon neutrality. And the reason being is that particular standard underpins most of the certification that is available for being net zero. And you have to use all these other tools to get through PAS 2060. The slight nuance, though, if you define your ambition as setting a net zero product, you would need to use something like PAS 2050, which is an assessment of the whole life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions at that point. And this is PAS 2060. It's a fairly straightforward management type standard, the continual improvement requirement. So, as I mentioned earlier, you need to define the company or define what you are making net zero, quantify the CO2 footprint of that boundary, and then start to develop a carbon management plan and make that commitment to be net zero by a certain date. Once you've made that commitment, you do really need to get on with it and start reducing and implementing that plan that you've set out. And then once you've done that, you can offset the remaining residual carbon emissions. And at that point, you can communicate that you are carbon neutral. The very important point on this, though, is that that's not the end. This is a continual improvement process. So year on year, you need to be more net zero, i.e. offset less. And so the sort of reduce the CO2 and check progress bit, you have to do that on an annual basis. So key points, there's lots of different terms used interchangeably. They are different. Zero carbon means no emissions at all, and carbon neutral or net zero, pretty much the same concept. Any emissions that are still being generated are being offset elsewhere to give you a net zero position. And you need to understand what you are making net zero, and that's what you should do in step one, really. And the standards are important, and we recommend using PAS 2060. So why would you want to become net zero? There's lots of reasons, and those reasons are propagating further as time goes on. So there is legislation. It is in UK law that our country will be net zero by 2050, and that means that everybody from huge businesses down to domestic dwellings need to contribute to that, so that the whole country can be net zero. But then when it comes to a business perspective, it is being quite supply chain driven. And so even just to win contracts, make more money, remain competitive in the market, this is the direction which almost every organisation will have to start to travel. And of course, you know, we shouldn't forget the fundamental reason for all this. It's not just about being a better business and making more money. There is a fundamental scientific reason for all this, and that's for the planet and for the future of the planet. So, from a human perspective, it's not just about quitting the carbon emissions. It's also about other health benefits for the human race. So, better way of life, more sustainable living for the human race, cleaner air and cleaner water, healthier homes, cleaner transport, improve livelihoods, and better habitats for wildlife as well. We want to maintain that biodiversity and species that we have. And then from a business perspective, I did mention a couple of things there, but there's, it does improve efficiency, competitiveness, makes your business more sustainable, improves image, gives you an opportunity to engage with your supply chain and your employees in a more deeper way. And it's certainly being used as something to stimulate the economy. And the term green recovery from the global pandemic has been used quite a lot in terms of how we get back to some level of normality. So there are obviously a number of obstacles and things that need to be done, and these are the challenges that organisations face. So of course it costs money. It's a business transformation, and it can be processes, it can be the way that you actually operate and procure in the supply chain, but there's a cost to it. And some businesses are doing better than others in terms of profitability. And then there's just availability of cash and the skills and resource that are needed as well. Some companies have become quite lean over the years and don't necessarily have the skills and resource in-house to be able to deliver this. So I've listed some of the things down the left-hand side. I won't read them all out, but they're more the sort of technical engineering type solutions that need to be developed. And again, skills and resource within organisations can be taught. And then the list on the right-hand side is more about completely changing the way that your business operates and how you think about doing business. So how you operate with your supply chain, value chain, employees, all your policies around sustainability. And this is a methodology that we've developed, which is in line with PAS 2060 that I mentioned earlier. And it's relatively straightforward in terms of its approach. So you analyse, you plan, and you act. And it's a continual improvement process. So under analyse, you're defining your carbon footprint. Under plan, you are identifying and developing the opportunities. And then under act, you are implementing and deploying those technologies and transactional elements that you need to meet net zero. So as I mentioned, the analyse is the carbon footprint, and you choose whether or not you're going to go scope 1 and 2 or all 3. This plan element is really about a hierarchy of sustainability. And you're looking at assessment of efficiency to reduce your actual energy consumption, conversion to lower carbon alternatives for utilities and heating systems. And then you've got on-site renewable generation, off-site renewable generation, and as a last resort, off-site. And this really gives you a roadmap to net zero, which will give you an estimate of the investment that you'll need to get there, any potential funding options and grants that are available, which there's quite a few at the moment from the government, and very importantly, an estimation of timescales, because there are a lot of organisations making pledges to be net zero by X date, another date, and with no idea how they're going to get to. So this is really how to formulate a net zero roadmap. And out of that, you will have this waterfall, which will tell you all the things that you need to do and how much impact those different approaches will have on your carbon footprint. So I mentioned this is the final section really, and it's about opportunities and the benefits of being net zero. And there are many. Even just measuring your carbon emissions forces you to look deeper into your business operations. And you might not have had cause to do this before. And and you start looking at your own operations and the operations of your supply chain, and also what happens to your product down the line in the value chain. So you can, obviously allows you to identify high emissions in the value chain, identify resilient risks. So once you start looking under the bonnet of some of your suppliers, are there some risks that you weren't aware of before? You can start ranking and rating your suppliers around their emissions performance. Once you start encouraging your supply chain to become more efficient, that can then potentially identify some really good cost reduction opportunities in the products and services that you buy in. You can start meeting responsible business goals for engaging with suppliers and assisting them. A concept called carbon insetting, where you offset your carbon emissions within your supply chain. And you can ultimately, obviously, improve the carbon footprint of your products and services. And it's also a really good excuse or reason to positively engage with your employees and your workforce, to reduce emissions. They get a better feeling about working for that business, and you get an improved company image, and it creates marketing opportunities. So ultimately, that was around the measurement, but benefits of being net zero: you get more control over your operations and your supply chain. It helps to identify strengths and weaknesses within your own operations and supply chain. It can really lead to strengthened relationships as well, and working partnerships with other organizations within your supply chain value chain, and allows you to more closely manage it. I mentioned about the employees. It can help improve morale within the business, improve supply chain efficiency, resilience, potentially reduce costs, and then obviously around the marketing, responsible business, but climate risk mitigation as well. I mentioned sort of at the beginning around the reasons to be net zero for the planet. They aren't just for personal or family reasons. Climate change can also pose quite a risk to your business in certain areas of the supply chain and value chain. And that's it from me on the presentation. I hope the rest of the day goes well.
Thank you, Matt. Our last guest speaker comes from a company that some describe as the biggest FM business that no one has ever heard of. Nonetheless, from a small family business founded in 1985, City FM is now a top 10 player in the UK with a growing international presence. Our speaker has worked in senior roles with several of the large service businesses and has a reputation as an inspirational leader. I'm guessing he needed all of that when he took on the role of CEO for City FM UK and Europe in March last year, just as lockdown began. With a talk entitled Adapt, Renew and Thrive, I'm pleased to introduce Paul Bean.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start today by telling you a little bit about City Facilities Management. 35 years ago, Willie and Susan Hockey launched City Refrigeration. And today, over 3 decades on, City FM is a global player in the facilities management industry. Operating in 9 countries and employing over 14,000 people, we now turn over 1.2 billion. I'd now like to play a short video to bring you up to date with our organization. Today, I'm going to share with you an insight into City and our experience in adapting to the changing circumstances, how we've renewed our ways of working, and how we hope to thrive in the new normal. Joining City back in March 2020 was not only a new role for me in a new organisation, but also a relocation for me and my family. We arrived back in the UK on the 28th of December 2019, after spending the previous 6 years in Australia and Singapore with Sodexo. And we headed to Harrogate, where we'd rented a temporary apartment for a few weeks while we searched for a new home. Little did we know that we were about to be thrust into a global pandemic that would see us in limbo, living in a range of temporary accommodation for over 5 months and having to move several times, with all of our goods stuck in the port. After only 2 weeks of joining City, we were in lockdown. It's certainly challenging enough joining a new organisation, but this for me was all on another level. At the heart of City, we have a strong community spirit. We care deeply about our people and our communities, and we have many initiatives that are above typical industry standards. One such example is our commitment to ensure that we pay on or above the living wage, and our death in service benefit for our cleaning colleagues is a unique feature of how we protect and look after our people's interests. Our labour retention is industry leading, and we've supported the growth and development of our long-serving employees over many decades. It was these principles, values and beliefs that first attracted me to City. We had to adapt to the news that the country was moving into lockdown. We quickly established a central incident team to help with the logistical planning of going into lockdown. Around 1,000 people had to work from home within a week from the government announcements. Pre-announcement planning allowed IT support and each business unit to react quickly. Our people started to work from home, testing the setup, improving the IT infrastructure before the government announcement became official. Technology was put in place to support setup, including laptops, printers, phones, VPN access, and online support via Teams, meaning when the announcement on the 19th of March came real, we were ready. At our Glasgow head office, we also set up a people forum to keep our colleagues up to date and ensure we were able to listen to their concerns while keeping them informed with the changes we were making to ensure the safety and meet new government guidelines in the workplace. We scheduled monthly meetings with more than 50 managers nationwide to check in on their well-being as well as their teams. We set keeping in touch challenges, provided well-being advice, ran activities across our teams and businesses, and we secured and mobilized our well-being hub for all people, giving access to exercise, recipes, benefits, mindfulness, and much more, as well as launching the Thrive Wellbeing app. Support teams were set up within specialized functions such as IT and HR, feeding into the central incident team to ensure people were supported throughout. Weekly meetings were planned. Timings of communication and contents were often developed through the weekends to ensure everything would be set up and any relevant information given to our managers and colleagues by Monday of each week. Our people team worked together to organise scripts, letters and guidance on the back of each government announcement to ensure that our teams were fully informed at all times, holding questioning sessions and personally briefing teams, quickly establishing a go-to for queries around COVID. Scripts were also created for managers to hold weekly wellbeing meetings with people who were furloughed to keep in touch during their absence. Support packs were issued in the form of useful Word documents covering numerous topics, including working from home, health and well-being, mental health, working from home with children, and managing teams remotely, and much more. These materials are then developed further and placed on an e-learning platform, making it easier to access and more interactive for all. Refreshers on all our wellbeing material were briefed to teams and new links sent to the whole organisation, including financial advice so that our colleagues could reach out to a variety of people for support on a variety of topics. Operationally, to comply with guidance, we adjusted regional and engineering teams working to business critical only and working from home wherever possible. PPE was delivered to all our field-based teams' home addresses. And working with our customers, we agreed what activities were business critical and what activities could wait to ensure our people's safety. We took on additional contractors to provide extra PPE, such as hand sanitizer, masks and gloves, all delivered to home addresses. We altered working hours and provided flexibility for all carers and parents of school-aged children. We introduced our COVID-19 secure risk assessments and ways of working, invested in new entrance automation for our head office with temperature check technology, and introduced various additional measures to protect our people. For those colleagues performing essential work who had to attend our head office, we provided food and drink free of charge to look after their well-being whilst at work. We conducted a COVID-19 survey to check in on our people to ensure they were okay and supported, and if needed, to action to support them. Our people are at the heart of what we do, and we have continually adapted ways of working and flexibility in when and where they work. We've utilised our people system to track the impact of COVID and help us implement emergency recruitment as and when required. For our people placed on furlough, we've topped up their salary to 100%, part of which was funded by our executive leadership team, voluntarily taking a 20% reduction in pay. Managers regularly checked in on those that had been furloughed, ensuring they had access to our employee assistance program and to other support mechanisms. The letters issued gave clear details of the government support available, not only for our people, but for their families as well. We tried to minimise the level of stress and worry imposed on many people throughout this time, especially those having to self-isolate. We paid our colleagues for up to 14 days as a special COVID response initiative for those who needed to self-isolate. We extended company sick pay as needed to avoid hardship. We utilised holidays to help financially and introduced financial help wherever it was needed. Most importantly, we took the decision to look at each case individually to ensure we addressed all of the issues appropriately. At any one time, we had over 500 employees out of the business shielding for various reasons, but mainly consisting of those extremely vulnerable, over 70 or pregnant. At the height of the pandemic, we were approached by members of the community and asked whether we had any contacts to manufacture face visors, which were desperately needed. This was at a time when the whole country was trying to procure PPE. We worked with one of our suppliers, J.A. Harrison's, and within a couple of weeks, we managed to procure the material and manufactured 2,500 visors within a further 2 weeks. This was at a time when material supplies were drying up and costs were escalating. We distributed the visors to hospice and care providers in our local communities in Scotland. With the initial close of the construction sector, our construction business saw the majority of projects suspended from the 24th of March and not to resume in England until May and July in Scotland. Our health and safety teams and project teams put in a huge effort to ensure the planning and management of sites were COVID compliant by the time we returned, ensuring the safety of our people and the customers, which was our most paramount thought. We were instrumental in working with our customers in advising and developing ways of work that ensured safety and compliance. The key was to build trust and confidence with our customers to ensure that projects could commence and be managed safely. It was also important that we were able to be flexible and agile and move at pace on complex and dynamic projects. We were asked by one customer to support their supply chain with the lessons we had learned from having to work through the lockdown on 3 projects that we were unable to close. Our management of projects allowed others to learn from this and supported customers to deliver their programs once lockdown eased. We worked very closely with numerous customers supporting and advising on their ways of work, again allowing projects to commence within a safe framework, safeguarding people, customers and contractors while ensuring the general public was reassured. As I've mentioned, our people are at the heart of City, and there are many examples of where they've gone above and beyond. For example, when we lost a colleague to COVID, his wife could not go to the shops, so she had to self-isolate. So we arranged for her shopping to be delivered. We've hired extra vehicles to allow people to attend work safely, and we continue to review what we do and how we do it to protect employee well-being at all times. There's no doubt that the pressure on the teams has been relentless, and they continue to manage and support their colleagues as they continue to work through the COVID-19 pandemic. One early challenge for City was to address how we would maintain our technical training and accreditation. Traditionally, we had schooled our technicians in a bespoke facility. The impact of lockdown measures presented us with the challenge to consider how we could continue to provide development to our teams so that as a business, we could maintain the same levels of service to our customers. We've gained a strong reputation in the industry for providing expert development in technical disciplines, using a combination of classroom-led and technical skills training in our bespoke workshops, each designed to replicate all of the key assets in place for our customers' environments. This has ensured over the years that we've built a solid reputation for providing highly trained engineers who've been assessed as competent by our specialist technical training team to work in reactive and planned maintenance. As all of our internal training is City and Guilds accredited, we undergo a rigorous annual reaccreditation where we evidence the materials, the approach and delivery, which is assessed by external verifiers. Whilst our training offering was already quite unique, COVID lockdown and restrictions challenged our teams to not only use their technical experience, but their creativity to ensure we could continue to deliver what our teams and businesses needed. Creating an interim solution that ensured we met our key value of work safe, home safe, we revised our program and redeveloped this into an accessible series of e-learning modules in virtual classroom sessions, with online assessments to obtain the passport to work, which is mandatory across many of our client sites. In delivering this new suite of remote training solutions, we redesigned existing materials and resources to facilitate remote delivery, including running pilot programs with existing engineers to test approach, learning experience and materials. This enabled us to design an optimal module duration, reducing the impact of screen fatigue with e-learning modules for introductory guidance and familiarization. Virtual classrooms with lesson plans redesigned for remote delivery, including slides and reference materials. Videos, bespoke familiarization videos were designed, delivering familiarity in planned maintenance and fault finding. Online knowledge post-learning assessments with pass rates that were reportable. And we utilized Microsoft Teams, where channels were created for each learning module, giving people access to videos and technical guides and tutor support. Our 18th edition training moved to virtual delivery, including the creation of reference materials and online mock papers, which were assessed and reviewed with learners after each module. Design and delivery of virtual classroom training in a new kit allowed us to upskill, utilizing online assessments and manager competence sign-off in the field. And to ensure the delivery was successful, all technical trainers undertook developments in creating virtual learning sessions. In 2020, our internal technical training delivered 10,400 training hours to 1,925 colleagues, running 4,800 virtual classroom and learning hours and delivering over 5,500 face-to-face sessions. A significant challenge presented by COVID restrictions was the delivery of our systems training. Whilst we already had some solutions on an e-learning platform, we'd not developed a practical training application. In a very short space of time, we extended the suite of training topics designed to be delivered on iPads, with learners able to not only attain underpinning knowledge in an interactive virtual classroom, but they're also able to practice and apply their skills live in the safety of the classroom. We applied the same approach to other systems such as time and attendance. Training managers on this system remotely, giving them the opportunity to apply their learning in a series of practice scenarios on the training system via a laptop. We delivered talent development programs, including mentoring workshops. This meant a complete redesign of the program and e-learning modules to make best use of the virtual classroom time for discussion and practical application of learning. We introduced breakout rooms for large and small group discussions, and we developed a series of micro screens that enable us to continue the interactive elements of workshops, including meta brainstorming, polls, problem solving, and gathering feedback from breakout sessions. We created digital workbooks that provide a resource for people to record their own notes and key learning. Practical sessions were held either one-to-one or with partners to apply skills such as coaching, while being observed by their tutor to gain coaching and feedback. And the final assessment is delivered via a presentation. This has now been designed to be delivered remotely, with the delegate, their mentor and senior manager joining a virtual presentation hosted by the tutor. To combat nervousness, tutors provided coaching and practice sessions with the delegates in preparation. To support well-being and mental health, we developed e-learning guides, a series of guides to support our people through the less obvious impact of COVID restrictions that have had on both our working and personal lives. The guides included welfare and well-being that incorporates mental health and healthy eating, exercise, and financial guidance. Working from home, managing a remote team, and homeschooling guides were all put in place by mid-April. And again, over this period, we delivered over 7,000 training hours with 600 virtual classroom learning hours and over 30,000 e-modules performed. So from initial scoping to first delivery of the virtual and blended training, we spent 2 months, meaning we kickstarted the training at the beginning of June 2020. Whilst virtual classrooms and the associated training resources cannot fully replace all aspects of technical competence training, there are clear benefits of moving towards a more flexible learning solution. Our people spend less time away from home, less time off the job, and of course absorb less cost for travel and accommodation. The success of our blended approach and the use of virtual classrooms has permanently changed the way we deliver both our technical and leadership and personal development programs. Our people have fed back that the programs are just as impactful as being in the classroom. All of this has meant that our people are fully trained and operational in similar timescales. We as a business maintain our culture of being safe and legal, high standards of development, and ultimately that there's been minimal impact to the provision of services to our customers. So the proverb necessity is the mother of invention's never been more apt to these times. It's incredible what we can achieve when we have to change. Like many organizations, City have a disaster recovery plan, and this generally consists of methods of business continuity planning. And one thing that's long stood as a key requirement has been our ability to be able to revert to alternative premises. Well, if this pandemic's taught us one thing, is that virtual office is not only a viable alternative, but it's also a better alternative. We've all become accustomed to working remotely. We've learned how to utilize existing technology better, and we're learning what works well and what doesn't. We've learned how important human contact is and how we take for granted the dynamics of daily contact. We're certainly starting to think about how life will look in the future, our newfound faith in technical solutions, the benefits that can be derived whilst understanding more about the risks for people working remotely. And another key learning from the pandemic to date is the re-emphasizing the mutual dependencies between City and our clients. Our clients have looked to us to ensure they keep trading in a safe and compliant manner. For particular services such as cleaning, the perception and value has increased enormously and potentially reset how these are viewed in the future. Our thinking continues to be shaped by the feedback that our people are giving us every day. We'll continue to adapt our ways of working, renew our thinking and outlook, and we're confident that while this pandemic will slow us all down, it will not stop us from thriving in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Paul, for joining us on the Q&A panel now. We're also joined for this Q&A session by the legendary Michael Cant, chairman of Mercury FM. Good to see you, Michael. How have you enjoyed the day so far?
Yeah, it's been so good to see you too, Martin. You're looking well. It's been a really good session, incredibly well organised, incredibly well presented, and some really good stuff's come out of it. So
please, people, post questions for Michael and Paul, and we'll get to them. Before we do, I was looking at the poll. What will FM be best known for in 2021? I guess 41% saying getting the workforce back to the office was predictable. Although I still bang on about this thing about most people don't work in offices, but never mind. 27% hygiene and safety, and on the back of 2020, I guess that's to be expected. 16% for digital transformation of the workplace. That's a surprise one for me. And given that Matt's presentation that we just saw and how important everybody keeps saying sustainability and energy management is, that's down there at 5%. So is it that we won't have time for it this year, or the other stuff is just bigger tickets? What do you think? I'll go to you first, Paul.
Yeah, look, I think it's often just, it's the mood of the moment, isn't it? That we're still in a state of lockdown, still trying to grapple with what life's going to look like on the other side, and still, I think, really challenging for organisations, companies that have really not come out and seen the light yet, are still in lockdown. And my heart goes out to industries like hospitality and, the hotels industry, the travel industry, the sort of non-food retailers. This is an unprecedented period. So it's not unusual, I think, that priorities have shifted. And also, I think, given lockdown, we must have made a significant impact on the environment with the reduction in CO2 and the amount of consumption that must have, disappeared from people not traveling as hard and so on. So, for me, I think it's a true reflection of the mood.
Michael.
Yeah, I think, interestingly enough, I think the reason that possibly the technology and other issues we think are high on the agenda are not necessarily high on the real agenda day to day. If you think about it, a lot of the technology that we've been talking about today has been around quite a while. It's been developed, it's been refined, but people are people and they do the job on the ground. They clean, they secure, they build, they maintain. So I think the reality is that we're starting to get to a place where what has happened in the last year is going to help us to think about the basics. Think about the reality of looking after a building, looking after a space, looking after people. And I think, although it's obviously been a terrible year and it's going to be a tough year to come, I do think this gives FM an opportunity to think again. We're making it too complicated. I commented earlier where there was an inquiry about it. We are making things very complicated. I think we need to think about what do we do to look after the people that we're paid to look after, both internally and externally, and really give them a reason to go out and do the job. Lots of admin. Why have we got so much administration? There's lots of technology. Do we actually need all of that in order to go and manage something or get somebody to site? So I think there's some challenges, but I do think we're starting to talk in the right zone now.
I used the phrase earlier on about the new tech for a while, has been around for a while, and it's kind of been a solution looking for an application.
Yes.
I wonder if this is it. I wonder, if this is the time for technology. What's the city position on new tech?
Yeah, look, a city's been, I think, really progressive in technology use over the last 10 years. And I think as it's become more accessible and more affordable, and to, your point exactly, is finding the right place to point it so that it actually drives value is spot on. We see it as a continuum. I think many of the things I referred to in my presentation were about just simply how we've adapted to utilizing the technology we already had. None of this was going out to market to find new stuff. It was really just about, we've now got a real purpose to use this. And there wasn't a plan B for people. It wasn't that they could opt out and, go and do the training session at a site. That just wasn't an option. So I think people being forced into having to get used to this sort of platform, this way of working, has actually helped them to understand it's not so scary and actually it can work. And yes, there are things that we lose when we're engaging online and so on, but we can still get the job done. And we wouldn't want this to be the only method of communication, but it's certainly a viable option and one that can be used, I think, more flexibly in the future. So rather than, it's just because it's a pandemic, it's, well, actually, instead of getting 30 people together, in some location along the motorway network to talk about a topic that could be easily done like this, maybe we create more efficient use, better quality of life for the people who don't have to travel, who don't have to spend the time away, who don't worry about getting home, all that good stuff. So I think it's an accelerant. It's almost acted as an accelerant for me to really drive better use of tech more than it is about new tech.
I mean, people. You talked a lot about people. Mike always talks about simplifying it. It's down to people delivering services. I was interested by George Lilly's comment. I think it was you, Paul, in your presentation used the phrase necessity has driven invention. George says necessity hasn't driven invention, it's driven less enlightened leaders to trust in the workforce. Any views on that, Mike? Have we?
I think now to sort of change the emphasis slightly. I think we do not spend enough time thinking about the individual corporate, the individual organisation. I've worked over the years in retail, pretty much all the retailers, pretty much all the banks, and every time they say, "What was it like at the other one? Is it the same?" None of these are the same. They are all different. And you need to create a corporate and an FM response to that corporate need individually. And I think where we are starting to move towards now is organizations saying, yes, just because we're in a particular sector doesn't mean we have to be like everyone else in the sector on the FM side. Everyone is different. And I do think that what we have the opportunity of doing now is recreating the entire corporate model. And that entire corporate model means taking a very literally blank sheet of paper or however the technology would like to do it, and we start again. And if we are to do one thing during this downtime period, which is obviously incredibly stressful for so many people, is let's get that fresh sheet of paper out and let's recreate it on the basis of technology we actually need and use. People who we can direct doing good things they want to do, things they want to be energized by. And I have to say, I think there's far too much overbearing administration. I think there's far too much stuff layered on top of this. And we need to get back to basics. And I know I'm getting towards the same thing, but I do think they all sit in the round, Martin.
Paul?
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. I think, it is important to simplify the way we work. We have become, I think, in many areas overcomplicated in the way that we try to administer, the work that we do. But maybe just to answer the question around the workforce and enlightened leadership, we spend a lot of time talking to our frontline people. The one challenge that we have in a pandemic or in a lockdown is how to keep connecting, and I think that's where technology is a real benefit. The opportunity to actually get a bunch of people quickly connected in this sort of format or through FaceTime or any other medium and tackle, the real hard issues, I think is an advantage that we probably wouldn't utilize before. So we're learning a lot, and I think it's the learning that's more important. So, through all of this, and I think I mentioned it in my talk earlier on, was that, we're constantly looking at what are we learning from the experience? How is this helping us? And I think to go back to Michael's point on simplification, it's helping us to understand that at times we overcomplicate the simple.
Yeah.
So, if a phone call or a FaceTime call or a quick, group session online can solve an issue, then that's what you do. That's the sort of new normal, if you like, rather than, let's call a meeting and get everybody traveling and so on and so forth. But we're just pointing to one or two examples, but I think you can take this right across the spectrum of activity that we perform for our customers and within our workplace. So, we're starting to try to ask the question, what are we doing? And I think somebody tackled, or earlier on, there was a discussion about vested outsourcing and concept of partnership with clients. We have varying degrees of success with that, but at the heart of City is partnership. But it is a journey, it's a maturity journey, and it's one that requires the building of trust. And the heart of trust is communication. So, for me, it's all of these mediums being applied in the right way to learn from the workforce, learn from our customers, and re-augment the way we work.
I guess, let's just stick with the word trust. We talked about leaders trusting their people, and successful leaders are those who trust their people. In my view, there's no question about that. but the supply side of the facilities management sector hasn't always been trusted by its customers, and often with very good reason. People have mentioned in passing during the day that some service providers have not necessarily behaved in the most ethical way during the last year. The retreat to commercial confrontation is a habit that developed in our sector, and I think it's one we've got to shake off. But I'm not sure how.
Well, I think we've made a lot of progress in the last 10, 15 years, Martin. I think the issue that we're finding is that with the increased transparency that we're getting, and this it applies across almost all contract forms and almost contract and almost service areas, what we're finding is the transparency is leading to more microscope. The more microscope will by definition lead to more criticality. Now, that journey is the same journey as many other industries went through in the last 20, 30, 40 years. I came from a construction architecture background, then a surveying background. We had people poring over our necks on every little detail of every little part of a building we were designing. It was heartbreaking, but it was the journey we had to go on. So FM is going through the same step of evolution, in my opinion, that all major industries go through in their lifetime and in their life cycle. What I would recommend is we talk more about the models that apply to that very specific requirement, the models that apply to the very specific group of individuals or the service requirement, and we actually build those models to reflect the corporate requirement of the client at the time. Now, that's a level of transparency that we all know that we've been in the industry. Didn't exist 15 years ago. It really didn't, and I think you would possibly agree with that. But we have the opportunity now to create those hand-built models from scratch with clients who are actually part of the model rather than sitting on top or beside it.
How have you... Is there a different focus around that from your time in Australia to what you've seen? I know you've not been in UK in, quote, normal times, but...
Yeah.
For me, Martin.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, look, I think it doesn't... What's interesting to me, having gone from the UK to Australia and then into a wider global role, is that, all markets are not in different levels of maturity. Customers are in different levels of maturity. And if they're dominant players in markets, they influence the market. In my experience, when we've come across customers that really get the value of a partnership and the value of a trusted, open and transparent relationship, you move on the journey a lot quicker. You get a lot more achieved. Innovation arrives a lot earlier. Cost efficiency is driven. But there needs to be more case studies demonstrably in our sector shared so that other customers can go, hang on, if that can work for these guys, that could work for us. And that's got to influence a change in the way services are procured and in the type of contracts that are structured. And as we heard earlier from, I think it was Andrew, talking about having to break the contract. Well, that in itself indicates the contracts are not fit for purpose anyway, whether you face a pandemic or otherwise. So for me, it's all in the heart of finding the right sort of partnership with a customer, with the right objectives at the outset. And question I asked a client back in Australia at the time was, and this is on a 10-year term, what does the end look like? In 10 years' time, when we look back at what we've achieved, what does it look like? Because that forms the journey. And I think often in the world we live in, we're looking at a year or 3 years or 5 years as a horizon, and it's not enough time to engineer an outcome that, is transformational. So I think it's all about where that customer organization is at, how they approach the market, and then absolutely how the market responds to that need. And just to mention one other thing, I think, because it's, really pertinent to building a trust, is that we have to, in working in partnership, make sure that expectations for customers are properly understood. And in my experience, whenever this goes wrong, it's because customer expectations are greater than an organization's ability to meet them. So that time spent to really understand what the customer's trying to get out of the exchange is critical. And that will lead to a more successful outcome than a contract with a set of specifications and KPIs and SLAs and so on.
Matt, glad you joined us. Well, welcome. I just bringing you into that conversation. The journey to zero carbon, working as a supplier with customers on that kind of journey, that I'm guessing that's very difficult to do in an old-fashioned adversarial, confrontational, contracting way. You're having to partner, you're having to collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we are an energy supplier, but we're also a facilities management business. And I think the energy efficiency, carbon reduction complements a facilities management contract. And on the energy supply side, it sounds or seems counterintuitive to reduce the consumption of a client that's buying energy from us, but we're more about long-term partnership, and the money and the margin that we would make from supplying energy is less important than having a longer-term contract with a client.
Yeah.
That's this expansion of the role that has been mentioned a few times during the day, isn't it? You know, it's we've come an awfully long way from just being bogs, basins, and underlay.
Yeah.
Just one thing I wanted to say, Martin, we picked up earlier, which I thought was a really useful commentary that ran through a number of the speakers. The issue in terms of the joining up between the construction, development and investor, as well as delivery partnership. It hasn't been mentioned specifically, but I feel very strongly that in order for us to break through, particularly now, we have to think about the fact that funding from government sectors is now running at minus, if not zero, interest rates. Now is the time to join with investors to do what we're talking about, because now the money is not costing the downstream the way it was historically. So we've got a real opportunity to join up in the one way that 10, 15, 20 years ago we couldn't, because interest rates were 5, 6, 7, 10, 8%. Now they're running at sub. And for investor market, now is the time to invest in the DBFO, or however we would like to describe it.
And I just go back to that bit that I asked Rob earlier and the tech guys earlier on. I'm going to ask Paul. All of this is great, you know, zero carbon, reinventing technology, reinventing real estate. But in your presentation, you talked about just how damn busy your guys are and your organization is during this lockdown and as we navigate our way out of it. How do we shift the priorities, and when should we be shifting the priorities?
Well, look, for us, Martin, we're already shifting them, and yes, response early on was intense. We sort of hit, I think, a sort of a new normal working pattern, if you like, over the second sort of lockdown period. We kind of knew it was coming. But we'd already started, and I'm sure many organizations have, a lot of new initiatives that we see as flowing out of this period. And certainly the energy issues and the environmental issues are very high on our agenda, and I'm sure they are on others. And I think the response that we've had today, as I said, is more mood-driven than necessarily priorities. I thought Matt's presentation was great because it really emphasized the sort of demystification, if you like, of what organizations need to be doing on zero carbon, but also emphasized that there's still a huge amount of work to be done. And I think what Michael's saying about the affordability and the route to other investors, I think is spot on, because we need, new renewables. We need new solutions to these age-old problems. and it's still quite a challenging marketplace. And for us, often, let's say a lot of the news focus has been on wind power, or it's been on photovoltaics, and then there's counter news that says, actually, there's far more carbon goes into producing these things than there is benefit. So we've got to get into a marketplace where there's truisms, real things that we can lean on as answers to these problems, rather than in this state of confusion about, well, do we then lean on wind power, or is that going to be countering our intent? Or are there other solutions we should be focusing our time or attention investment in? And we don't have time to talk about it today, but we're connected with a number of SMEs that are doing some brilliant stuff in energy, new renewable energy solutions, but they need funding. So absolutely, to Michael's point, if we can't tap into that funding now, we're never going to do it.
Yeah, you never will.
No. Okay, well, I'm afraid we have to leave that one there. We've got Lucy coming up. Thank you guys for your contributions this afternoon. Thanks, Mike, for joining the panel.
It's a pleasure.
And hopefully see you all in the networking a bit later.